Hi, welcome to the next video in my Training Your Dog for Distance Work series. This is techniques for distance work. So this is the different types of techniques you can do to train your dog. There's three main ones that I suggest and or have used at some point. I'm sure there's more, and I'm sure there's other ways of doing this. This is simply the way I do it. So I'll just quickly go over the different techniques you can do, and so this gives you several options to be able to carry on this training work. And one of the things is you come out, and I do everything basically just by myself, and you know, I get messages from people saying, oh well, you know, I'm not real confident, can I have my partner do this or do that? So there are always workarounds for that, and so there is workarounds for this as well. So there's several options. One, if you've got a glass sliding door in your house, that's terrific as one option to do. You could also do it through a sliding screen door, but if it's not a strong screen door and you can't trust your dog not to come through it, it may not be a good option, whereas a glass door is a better option. Still for this, you still need to tether your dog to something, so whether you can get a heavy piece of outdoor furniture or something like that to put the lead around so the dog can't wander off. Maybe able to go off a bit to the side at the length of the lead, but it can't just turn around and take off, because if you lose control of that dog, the dog fails and you've failed that dog. So remember, everything we do is about setting your dog up for success. Alright, if your dog never fails, I went through and did the entire recall with Koji and he never failed once because I didn't allow it, because he was always under control until it was time for him to come off. And I was convinced when it was time for him to come off that he was very unlikely to fail. And when he does, and I'm sure at some point he will, he'll go back on a lead, on a 50-foot lead, for instance, at the last level that he was on before he was off, and he'll run back through that until he shows me he can be trusted. But up to that point he never failed because I didn't allow it. And most things when I'm teaching my dogs, I work really hard on never letting them fail. Now they do sometimes because I muck up, I screw up, I take my, you know, eye off the ball and things go wrong, but I try very hard not to let them fail once. So they gain in confidence, their understanding of what's got to happen is very clear. So tether your dog to something so it can't. Open your door, your glass door, just wide enough that you can get your hand out to treat that dog. And so you have your dog here on the edge of the door, and that's open enough that you can then treat the dog. So the dog's here, the gap's just here next to it. And then you'll go through the techniques like I show you, and the dog can't come forward because the glass door works as a barrier. So you start your training there until your dog gets that it's got to stay in position and execute those commands from where it is, not from by coming to you like it was originally taught, coming to you and being right next to you. So you'll start off very close and you'll begin to get your distance from there. So that's one way of doing it, and it's not too bad a way of doing it, although it can restrict you depending on where your glass door is situated. It can restrict you to a smaller area, but it's a great way to start. You don't want to stay behind there for too long. You want to be able to get your dog out, but it's a great way to start just to get your dog understanding the concepts of the exercise and what you want from that exercise. And once your dog begins to understand it, you get it out from the glass door, you tether it to a fence or a pole or something like that outside, and then you go back and find your distance that you work with that dog without the glass door being there. And it may only be a metre, for instance, but then you build it like, you know, you build it again like you were originally. The dog will accelerate its learning because it understands the principles anyway. The other way is having a second person do it. So if your dog is really difficult, you're finding it really difficult to move from that bubble that I talked about, and that when the disengagement happens you can't get that back from the dog, Again, strong focus. I know I keep pushing it. Strong focus. Look at my video series on focus. Make sure you get your dog's focus up. It helps with everything, including this. It's just super important. But if you're finding that you go to step back and you just can't get the dog to do anything, it's just coming to you, it's carrying on, blah blah blah, you need a second person. If you've got to do that, and really it's only if you've got to do that, then you get a second person. Their job is simply to have that dog on a lead, remember, on a lead, and stand beside the dog, and then you'll give the commands, and you'll see how it works, you know, as we go through the series. But you'll give the commands, and like I said, we'll be working just on initially just on sitting down. That's all we're going to work on. Everything else gets done exactly the same. So sitting down is what we're going to work on. And if the dog doesn't immediately go, you know, say it's a down, and the dog doesn't immediately go down, the person will just very gently step on that lead and guide the dog down. Gently on the lead. Guide is a word. You're not going to sit there and you're not going to force it down or anything else. They're going to shut their mouth. They're not going to speak to that dog. And they're going to be very gentle, and they just guide that dog down. If you go sit and the dog doesn't immediately sit, they simply guide that dog up, again gently, guide that dog up into a sit. Again, they don't say a word, they don't interact with the dog. You move forward when the dog's ready to be treated. You treat the dog and you praise the dog, let it know it's right. So you come to the dog, right? Because you want that dog. And again, that's why I say auto stay is so important. You want to come to that dog, because when you give this command, you want that dog to stay there. Because if that dog gets up and goes to come to you halfway through it, and if there's a road there, for instance, because that's what you're trying to stop, that dog is going to die. So you want the dog to stay there. So you come to the dog. So this is going to get you some exercise, because there's a lot of coming back and forth. It's tedious, it's boring, but it's life-saving. So I guess it comes down to what's really important. And this person that's here, you get rid of them as soon as possible. So as soon as your dog starts getting this command, starts doing it with that person there, get rid of them. Because you've still got somebody in that dog's bubble. So at the moment, you're still training that dog to come up and down when somebody's right here. So as soon as your dog starts coming up and down because you're saying it over there, get rid of this person and get that dog coming up and down when you're over there and nobody's next to them. Then you're working outside the bubble, you're increasing the bubble, you're increasing the bond, you're increasing the trust, and you take it from there. Alright? So you can use that second person, but only stay at 1 or 2 meters away. Don't go any further back. Don't try and increase it to 5 meters, because you don't want this person here. 1 or 2 meters, so your dog starts understanding that even though you're there, it has to obey you. And then get rid of this other person right out of the picture. Okay, get rid of them, because they're only going to hinder the dog down the line. Because this dog has to do this independently. Alright, so that's super important. So that's your second way that you can do it. And the third way, which is the way I do it, and my preferred way, is you get a lead, you tether the dog to something. If I'm in a paddock, it'll be to a fallen tree branch, or a bit of rope around a stump, or off a bit of barbed wire off a farm fence or a post. Here, I'm doing this here. As I showed you, I've marked it all out. So I'll be just tethering Koji to the fence behind me. I know that then gives me 50 metres back that way to work with him over a period of time, and that's the way he'll be. So as you'll see with the way I'll do it, if he'll be tethered there, I will start close to him. I'll work out his working distance, at what distance he will still be compliant and obey my commands 100% of the time. Once I start that distance, I'll step just slightly outside it and begin to work there until he gets that. So he will be initially tethered to that fence, and that stops him coming forward, because he's just like any other dog. He was taught up close, he'll want to come to me because that's how he was taught. So I begin to teach him it's alright to do it from a distance. Right? So I hope that explains and gives you a couple of options to go. So like I said, the way I do it is my preferred one. It's just one-on-one on a fence in the area you're going to be in, and the dog begins to get it very, very quickly that that's where, and you don't need to change anything until you start adding distractions. Alright, I hope that helps. We'll see you with the next one.